like to call this meeting to order. Monday, September 18th, 2023 at 6 p.m. Welcome each one here this evening. I'd like to do our land acknowledgement by acknowledging the land on which we gather as traditional territory on Nishawabi, Ottawa, and Mississauga peoples. Number 2, confirmation of the agenda that the Council of the Township of North Huron hereby accepts the agenda for September 18th, 2023 council meeting as presented. Mover, Councillor McBurney, Councillor Palmer, all in favor? Carried. Disclosure of pecuniary interests. Go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Reeve. I'm declaring a conflict of interest on the agenda item 6.1, the zoning proposal for 303 or 309 King Street, Plan 170, Park Lot 2 to 5, Lot 1 Blythe. I'm an owner. I own property within the zoning, the required zoning and notification at 303 King Street. So, for transparency, I will not be participating in the debate or voting.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Public comment. This is opportunity for members of the public to speak to an item of business on the agenda, 2 minutes per person. And if it's related to the planning items, I ask that you take the opportunity later on the agenda for that portion of time for you to speak. Is there anybody? Seeing none. Consent agenda. That the Council of the Township of North Huron hereby adopts consent item 5.1.1, and further that the Council of Township of North Huron hereby receives the consent items 5.1.2 to 5.3.3 for information. Do I have a mover? Deputy Reeve? Councillor Van Hierson? Did anybody want to pull anything from anything? Go ahead, Councillor Wright.
Thanks, through you, Reeve Heffer. I don't really want to pull anything, but in the Veolia report, I did, and of course the issue with Alberta right now and their E. coli outbreak was kind of going through my mind when I was watching or reading that water and wastewater report. And there it mentioned that they're audited by NSF International. Do we ever get those audit statements from Veolia? I'm curious about that. Like, it'd be good to know what the audit process was from a due diligence perspective, right?
I'll ask Public Works. Mr. Furtney, please.
Through your Reeve Heffer to Councillor Wright, yes, we do. They are audited by NSF, and actually we got the report last week, so that'll be posted on the website.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. All in favor? Carried. 6, public meetings and hearings and delegations. 6.1, pre-zoning proposal at 309 King Street, Blythe. Zoning bylaw update. Subject lands, Plan 170, part lots 2 to 5, part lot 1, Blythe Ward, Township of North Huron. At this time, I'd ask Planner Holman to come forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Council, for having me this evening. I'm just going to bring up my presentation. So, as mentioned by the Reeve, the purpose of this item and this presentation is to hold a public meeting for the proposed pre-zoning on the property at 309 King Street in Blythe. So just to give some background for members of the public as well as council, so the township is currently undergoing a township-wide general review of their zoning bylaw. This is something that regularly occurs every 5 years. And as part of this, it was proposed to council that there be an evaluation of any pre-zoning opportunities on large residential future development properties. So these are defined as any properties that are currently or is historically designated as residential in the North Huron official plan, and that they're often large vacant greenland properties. So staff did discuss some discussions with landowners about their properties and potential future plans for that. And that was something that was brought back to council in July, and in particular on this property. So there was interest expressed by this landowner to potentially explore pre-zoning the property for residential development. And in the previous council meeting, staff were directed to provide circulation to members of the public so that they would be aware of this, and then they could provide comment at this public meeting. So the purpose of this, again, this meeting is to receive these public comments. So the following shows the subject lands from 2020 aerial imagery. Again, as mentioned, the lands are currently designated residential. They are also zoned future development in the current North Huron zoning bylaw. So historically, the future development zoning has been used as a bit of a placeholder until such time a development's ready to occur, and then typically a rezoning would happen to rezone the lands to whether it be low density, medium density, or high density residential. So the applicant's agents have provided correspondence to this agenda, as well as at previous council meetings, that they have intentions for future residential development on the site. They are in favor of a request to pre-zone the lands, and they have outlined some possible options that they are considering for the property, in options for R1, so residential low density, or R2, residential medium density. So in terms of an overview of the pre-zoning approach, so as I mentioned before, commonly these properties would be initially zoned future development, which then would require an additional zoning bylaw amendment. An alternative option is to pre-zone these lands for a certain density or type of residences, just to provide some direction to what the property could possibly be used for, but with the caveat that with further planning applications, such as a plan of subdivision, a lot of the technical details in terms of the feasibility of that would be addressed. So in terms of this, it is proposed that a holding symbol be applied to any pre-zoning. So the effect of the holding symbol would mean that no development, so including any building permits, would be able to occur until that holding symbol was also removed. So in staff's mind, the test for removing the holding would be that any required technical materials regarding servicing, stormwater management, technical studies would be received and in place. And in this case, given the property is a large vacant residential property, it is anticipated as well that a plan of subdivision application will be submitted. And at that time is when a lot of these technical details are required to be addressed with technical materials and reviewed to the satisfaction of the township. And plan of subdivision applications are also brought to council for decision. A site plan control application is another application typically for larger developments, like an apartment building. So that's another process that we have to do technical review. In terms of the site-specific pre-zoning, and again, the actual draft bylaw and the notice was attached to the report to council for further information. But it's to change the lands on the zoning on the lands from future development to a special zone of residential low density or medium density with, as mentioned previously, with the holding symbol. So in terms of the permitted uses, I do have another slide that does go over this in terms of residential building types. The purpose of the special zones would be specifically to provide language that says, notwithstanding any provisions to the contrary, development cannot occur until the required technical requirements regarding servicing, so that would be things like stormwater management, water and sewage, and then compatibility with any neighboring operations. Industrial operations would also need to be considered, as the property is in proximity to industrial lands. And as mentioned previously,
The microphone, just pull the microphone
yes.
a little bit.
okay. Sorry about that. Hopefully that's a bit better. And as mentioned before, the inclusion of the holding symbol on the lands would also not permit development until that is removed. So the following does show a map of the proposed area of each property to be rezoned. So in the southern portion, in the darker hatching, that is what is proposed to be that R1 residential low-density special zone. And then to the north would, in that lighter hatching, would be the residential medium-density zone. So with the residential medium-density zone, it is proposed that that allow for both R1, so the low density, as well as the R2 uses. This was requested to provide some flexibility to the future developer as they work towards finalizing their plans. And again, as mentioned before, in terms of the language, to summarize, it says sufficient, the holding symbol on these lands shall not be removed until a plan of subdivision or plan of condominium receives draft approval, sufficient servicing is available, and the required technical materials and studies at the time of application are received regarding land use compatibility with existing industrial operations. So similar wording is also included for the medium density zone. However, this also speaks to site plan control, which is a more common application for apartment building type style development. The following provides more details on what is permitted in the R1 zone. So generally speaking, it's a single detached dwelling, semi-detached dwelling, duplex dwelling, a row house dwelling, so townhomes, up to a maximum of 3 units, triplex dwelling, so that's 3 units, a quadruplex dwelling, that's 4 units. And then in all of our residential zones, we permit a dwelling with supports. A converted dwelling is also permitted in the R1 zone. So that's if you have a larger single detached residence and you wish to convert that. So typically that's more in our historic neighborhoods, but notwithstanding that is permitted in the R1 zone. In terms of the R2 zone, it would be those uses permitted in the R1 zone, as well as a row house dwelling. So that would be townhomes with no unit limits, and then what we refer to in our bylaw as a multiple unit dwelling, but it's often referred to as an apartment building to a maximum height of 3 stories, as well as a retirement home and dwelling with supports. This is a concept plan that was provided by the developer's agents. That shows a potential concept plan for the property. And again, I want to emphasize the word of a potential concept plan. In terms of what is being considered this evening, again, it is just the zoning. Something like this in detail in terms of the lot fabric, that would be something that would have to come later with a plan of subdivision. So it is reasonable to expect that this may possibly change as more technical materials are received, and in particular with regards to stormwater management, in terms of the size of the block that hasn't been assessed at this point, the stormwater management block. It is worth noting that stormwater management facilities and then any other necessary infrastructure is permitted in all residential zones. So that's specifically zoning for the stormwater management pond is not necessarily something that needs to be done today, but again, an emphasis that this is a concept plan provided for information. In terms of comments, so council has received written comments received at the date of the report submission. The notice was circulated within to landowners via mail within 120 meters of the subject lands, as well as agencies, so that aligns with Planning Act requirements. The landowners, planning and engineering agents and consultants who are also here this evening have also provided written comments included on the agenda, and verbal comments are being accepted at the public meeting. In terms of next steps for council, it is recommended that they receive this report for informational purposes, and that they provide the opportunity to receive verbal comments at the public meeting, and that further, it is recommended that council direct staff to bring back a report with a recommendation on the proposal at the next regular council meeting, which is proposed for October 2nd. So I'm happy to answer any questions that council may have, but also noting that there is going to be an opportunity for the landowners' agents as well as members of the public to provide comment.
Thank you, Hannah. At this time, we'll go to 6.1.2 and have this opportunity to comment on application by applicant and/or agent. Kate?
Good evening. Can you hear me okay with the mic like this? Okay. And over here? Excellent. My name is Steve Weaver, and I'm a planner with GSP Group. I'm here tonight on behalf of the owner of the property, Mr. Dave Franken. And along with me tonight, we're also representing Mr. Franken are Nancy Mickey and two representatives of Cobide Engineering, Steve Cobine and Amy Hovarth. And we're happy to try and answer any questions from tonight's meeting on behalf of the owner. You'll find a copy of our letter, specifically my letter dated September 11th, 2023, in your agenda package, as well as Cobide Engineering's letter of the same date. And my letter focuses more on some of the planning considerations for this property. We support what Hannah has presented in terms of the proposed pre-zoning for the property. We did previously meet with representatives of North Huron, as well as Huron County and Maitland Valley Conservation Authority in relation to our client's interest in this property, and specifically to talk about what would be required to potentially develop the property for a plan of subdivision similar to what's been outlined on the slides that were presented by Hannah. Previously, I was here at the July 17th council meeting where council received the second draft of the zoning bylaw update. And we were aware that there would be a notice to the neighbors regarding the proposed pre-zoning and that this would come back for further consideration tonight. So we're happy to be here to try and answer any questions from the public, specifically with respect to the pre-zoning. With that said, I want to emphasize that this pre-zoning process would not be the end of discussion with the public and yourselves with respect to proposed development of the property. There would, through a plan of subdivision process, be further public notice requirements as well as a public meeting. And we'd be happy to share more details as they become available through a process like that. From the planning standpoint, we see this as an optimal site for further residential development in the community of Blythe. Blythe is designated as a primary settlement area in your official plan, and that means that it's intended for housing development. It's one of a few communities in North Huron, specifically where a broad range and mix of housing types and choices are encouraged to be located. And it's also where the supply of future housing needs is anticipated to be met. Specifically, the subject property is designated residential in the North Huron official plan, permits a range of housing types. It directs that new development should occur at a density of 15 units per hectare and with full municipal services, so sanitary and water services.
The battery might have died.
I think we just have to change the battery. Sorry, sir.
Test. Oh, am I back? You want to change? Okay. Okay, can you hear me again? All right, new batteries, great. So right now in the zoning bylaws, Hannah outlined the site. Seemed to help when I took it out. Better? I don't know why, but that works. And as indicated on the notice of public meeting,
If you want to
You can come up on the stage here, sir.
Thank you. Can you hear me now better?
Yes.
Okay, great. So as I was mentioning, the site is currently zoned future development, FD. That's basically a zone that just recognizes that the land is intended as per the official plan for some form of future development without designating specifically what types of housing or other uses that may be permitted. So basically, rezoning is required in order to do what the official plan anticipates, which is to develop the property for housing. And as indicated in the notice of public meeting, the proposed pre-zoning of the site through the zoning bylaw update would change the zoning to R115H and R224H, and these changes would implement appropriate zoning of the site in keeping with the official plan. The holding provisions would require further technical information and studies to be provided in support of the development of the site. So again, as I mentioned, this wouldn't be the last step before the site could be developed. There would be further processes with the public and council and staff, as well as agencies who comment on development applications before the final details are established. When we spoke with Maitland Valley Conservation, MVCA, through pre-consultation, they specifically noted that there's no known natural hazards and no regulated features on the site. Now, the MVCA specifically regulates wetlands and other natural hazards and certain natural heritage features, but does not regulate anything on the site. And the reason for that is that the existing ponds on the site are actually human-made. They're not natural features that are protected in the official plan. They're not regulated by the MVCA. It was also identified that in support of the development of the site for a plan of subdivision and rezoning, there would be no requirements for natural heritage studies, environmental impact studies, or similar assessments because there are no protected natural heritage features or hazards on the site. I also just noted that the site is not located within a wellhead protection area for the municipal drinking water system. I wanted to respond just quickly to a concern that was raised at the July 17th council meeting, where it was noted that there's a concern that the development layout would result in certain landlocked parcels. The way the proposed development concept plan has been designed, it illustrates that the existing properties on the north side of King Street do in fact have existing road frontage along that street, and they would not be landlocked by the proposed development. The information in Cobide's letter summarizes information that we have so far on water and sanitary servicing. The intent, of course, would be to develop the subject land with full municipal water and sanitary services. It also discusses stormwater management considerations and drainage, traffic considerations which will be addressed through a traffic impact study, and all of these technical details would be provided as required by the municipality through the plan of subdivision process. And then we've just noted in summary that, in our opinion as professional planners, that the proposed pre-zoning of the subject land is in keeping with the municipality's official plan, and we would recommend that it should be approved. As noted, detailed information and technical studies will be provided through the plan of subdivision process and as a requirement to lift the proposed holding provisions through the zoning amendment. I'll just briefly cover off some of the information in Cobide's letter, and if there are questions about that, I would encourage you to direct those to Amy or Steve behind me, who can talk in more detail about the engineering information. So there are existing 200 millimeter diameter sanitary sewers on McConnell, Wellington, and King Streets. The intent would be to connect to those sewers with the development. There will be a more detailed investigation of the condition of those sewers just to make sure that they're suitable for additional units to connect. But nothing's been identified as a concern to date with that or in terms of their sizing. In terms of stormwater management, there is, as Hannah noted, a proposed stormwater management pond. The idea with the stormwater management pond, or the purpose of it, is to ensure that there's no negative drainage effects to any of the adjoining properties. So whatever runoff goes off the property today, that would be improved upon it would be no greater after development. It's called pre-development to post-development. In other words, the pre-development runoff situation would be matched with the post-development. So the level of water that's running off into the stormwater management system would be controlled by the stormwater management pond. It would be fully designed in accordance with the Ministry of Environment and Municipal Standards and Requirements, and would include both quality and quantity control features. There was some review of the potential to utilize the existing ponds on the property for stormwater management. They weren't designed for that, unfortunately. They're there from past remnant uses. They do limit the ability to develop the site in keeping with the official plan if those ponds were retained as is, because they occupy some of the land area, would affect the pattern of the roads, and also the ability to meet the density requirements. So there is further investigation ongoing with respect to those ponds and to see what's in them. But they're not protected natural heritage features, and so far the information from an engineering standpoint suggests they cannot be used for stormwater management. For water servicing, that's fairly straightforward. The site would be serviced with existing water services connected at McConnell, Wellington, and King Street with a looped system. So that's actually preferred for water system design, to loop the water main through the site and then back to the existing water main. And the water main within the development would be 150 millimeters in size. I did mention a little bit about drainage and grading, and we can get into more detail about that if needed. But the last point I just wanted to make, as highlighted in the letter from COBIDE, is that there will be a traffic impact brief. So it would model out how much traffic would be expected from the proposed development, and that information would be submitted for municipal review as part of the subdivision process. And I would just note that there are 3 points of access proposed in the concept plan. That isn't the final plan, but that's what's shown so far. And the traffic impact brief, the purpose would be just to make sure that there's no negative impacts to those roads, and that there isn't a level of traffic that would have any negative traffic impacts. So there will be a functional servicing report, stormwater management report, and traffic study with the subdivision proposal when that comes forward. And I hope that information is helpful at this point. As I mentioned, we fully support the proposed pre-zoning, and we'd be happy to take any questions tonight, either now or when the public has comments. Thank you.
We'll go to 6.1.3 first, Mr. McBurney, and we'll just have comments by others in the attendance, and maybe if Steve could just stay there, or the
Sure,
other
I'll
two
stay
use-
close by.
Yeah, okay, thank you. We're hoping the mic will work now down there, so anybody from the public that would like to have a comment, just have to come up and say your name and give your address. Yes, go ahead, sir.
Do you hear me?
Yes, thanks.
You don't need to.
My name is Dean Walker. I live at 335 Dinsley Street with my wife, Carol Casey. And we have signed a petition along with some of the neighbors. 217 people have signed it so far, that would really like to emphasize that this has been a natural area that is thriving, has 2 species of turtles in it, multiple frogs. From now until it frees up, we have over 100 geese that land in that pond and have a chance to get ready for their migration. In the spring, we have up to 12 nesting pairs of geese that are there. It's not listed in the MRI as a designated area, but it's certainly been a thriving area for the last 80 years plus, and it's been a steward by the Johnson family for those 80 years, and by Mr., the present, or the past owner for those years, and we'd really like to see it there. The biggest problem that we have here is they say that the drainage, it's not a good drainage pond or good water retention pond. It rises 6 feet on average every year. Some years it's risen 8 feet. It takes over 2 months to drain into the municipal drain and then into the town or the village storm sewer system. That system is at capacity in the spring. It's been over capacity several times in the last 5 or 6 years. McConnell Street in particular, the water was rising a foot out of the storm sewers, flooding all those areas in that, those houses in that area. And if you remove this pond, plus all the hard surfaces that are going to go in with the housing developments, you're going to have hundreds or maybe hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of water that have to go somewhere. And that storm sewer system does not handle that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay,
If there's any more comments.
just before you go there, could we see if there's any other questions, and then we'll be able to get them? Would there be, okay, yeah, go ahead.
Yes, good evening, everybody. My name is Michelle Richmond, and I live at 308 Wellington Street, and I did send in a letter to, I think it must have been Anna that I sent it to, in reference to some concerns I had. My biggest concern is where we live, the water that lies in that field and over that pond is a huge amount of water. Actually, we have Canada geese that live in there, and they duck their heads in there, and I am just concerned about the grade and the amount of water that sits there. That's gotta go somewhere. And we have never had water problems before in our yards or in our basements. And my biggest concern is, how do we know that you say that, yes, we're gonna be able to do this, we're gonna have the capacity to take all this water in, but what happens if it doesn't work? What happens to us? Like, everything's been upturned and the water's been relocated, and if we have issues, who's gonna address those issues and who's gonna pay for those?
Thank you. Were there any other hands out there? Just,
Yeah, and that mic's not on, so if someone just hits the button at the top, just.
Good evening, my name is Tony Chafe, I live at 307 Wellington Street in Blythe with my wife Candace. I'm just wondering how high they're gonna have to build up this area. Because it's very low, like the other people have talked about. There's a lot of water that lays there. I'm just wondering how high they're gonna have to, how much fill they're gonna have to bring in. And this projected pond that they're projecting to put in, if it's gonna be way up in the air, or if it's gonna be way down. I know it's a hard thing to explain or hard to look at, but I'm just wondering how much fill and how much higher they're gonna make this area compared to what our existing neighbors are gonna be. That's my concern. We're not against housing. We got young children, or older children now, but everybody needs houses. I'm all for housing. There's another place in Blythe that they could build the houses, but that's another story. So thank you very much.
thank you. Anybody else from the public that would like to make a comment?
Just have to hit the button on the mic to turn it back on. It's not working.
Just maybe touch the button on the mic there, Mr. Black. There's a button at the top.
Can you hear me?
No, just hold it down and then there'll be a green light that'll turn on the microphone.
Green light on. No?
No. Yep.
on. Here, okay. Murray Black, 284 McConnell Street. And the last couple of years, we've had some floods in our backyard, and just prior to that street, and we had muskrats floating around in a pond in my back lawn for I don't know how long before it disappeared. So if you're putting houses to the east of that, how much more water am I going to get in my lawn and the neighboring lawns as well? Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public would like to make a comment at this time? Okay.
I'm Ken Whitmore, 307 McConnell, and my concern is that the infrastructure is overtaxed as it is, and I think it's a joke hooking into what we have. I don't think it can handle it, and we're the ones that are going to pay for it in the end.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public wants to make a input? Seeing none? Okay, at this time we'll move to 6.1.4, opportunity for questions, comments from council members. Any comments from, go ahead, Councillor McBurney.
Yes, you, Reeve. My concern, of course, is stormwater management, but on this map, I don't see how it's going to fit in with Hamilton Street, because that's where Hamilton Street, it drains through the backyards of the people on McConnell Street.
Okay, thank you,
That would be my question.
thank you. Councillor Wright, please.
Yeah, so I guess on a more general note, thanks, and through you, Reeve. So Hannah, maybe you could answer the question, like, obviously there is a stormwater issue with that area or a concern. So at what point does that have to be addressed before, you know, we kind of cross that bridge and there's no turning back?
Yeah, through the Reeve. Yeah, thanks for that question. I can answer that, and then obviously if the developers' agents are able to provide more details in terms of the technical. I'm just going to go back to Councillor McBurney's question. I just want to make sure that I understood. I'm just going to go to the map just so we can all see. So Hamilton Street to the south. Sorry, do you mind clarifying your question? I just want to make sure I understood correctly.
Well, Hamilton Street drains, through you, Reeve. Hamilton Street drains towards McConnell, towards the pond. Everything goes to the pond. So I just don't know what it would look like with this storm management pond, and is that water from Hampton Street, how's that gonna look? That's the part I can't see.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, through your Reeve. I will let the applicant's agents provide some commentary on this, but I will say, again, I wouldn't be the technical person reviewing it, but in terms of what township engineering would expect at a minimum is the current conditions as they're existing today, they need to accommodate for that in addition to additional drainage that may occur as part of the development. But in terms of that specific area, I will just see if Cobite, as the applicant's agent, has any comments if they've explored that.
Good evening. Everyone can hear me? Good. Your question was regarding Hamilton Street, which is located,
South of McConnell.
okay. And, well, maybe I'll back up. So we've taken generally a high-level review at this point in the whole process, development process. We have met, last year we met with township staff reviewed, in particular, the drainage. We knew the drainage was going to be very tricky here because we've heard, and I've walked the streets, I've met some of you, I think, over the course of a year or so, and the current owner and the previous owner have let me know that there's drainage concerns and drainage infrastructure that may be undersized. And from what I understand, there's currently a drain in the backyards of the houses that are mostly fronting onto Morrison Street, or sorry, it's Morris? Yeah, Morris Street, that comes onto the applicant's property. That drain is actually picking up some farm drainage tiles to the east as well. So we're aware there's a lot of unknowns here, and again, we're at the start of this whole process and acquiring information on that backyard drain that seems to be causing a lot of issues. And now for the Hamilton Street corridor, or the street, I'm not aware that that drains back onto the property, but you're saying it does? Okay. Again, we'll take that in.
Cuts across just before the farm at the end of it.
Okay. Okay. From Hamilton Street. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Again, we are at the initial stages of the engineering review. As Hannah said, we still have to go through the plan of subdivision process, which is where we get into the nitty-gritty engineering design. We're going to be video cameraing the existing infrastructure on the 3 streets, and perhaps Hamilton Street too. But we're going to look at the sanitary sewer, but the big one on our list is the storm sewer. There is a 20-inch storm sewer on Wellington Street. That's the middle street. That's why we're targeting that street. What we want to do is take the property offline of that backyard storm sewer system. That's got a lot of question marks to it and seems to be creating a lot of issues downstream of this property. And we've looked at the storm sewer, or we will be cameraing that storm sewer just to see what the condition of that storm sewer is. And again, it's a 20-inch storm sewer, which is a pretty large-sized storm sewer. It makes its way down Morris Street down to Blythe Creek, and the pipe progressively gets bigger and bigger as we get downstream of all these properties. So as part of our work, we're going to be looking at that storm sewer. The storm water management pond that we're proposing, and again, we put it there because that is generally the lowest point of the property. And when we looked at the existing pond, it's about 1.5 acres in area. Good, fair-sized pond. It's got quite a history to it. It was built or made, I guess, a long time ago. They were extracting the clay or the silty clay from that property, making bricks. But anyway, we've looked at that. Fortunately, it's kind of upstream of where we want to drain everything to, and that's why we're looking at filling that in, creating another separate pond where it's shown on our concept plan, and then tying that into the Wellington Street storm sewer system. So, and then that would take the water offline or take it out of that backyard drain that seems to be giving everyone a lot of problems. And we do have our homework cut out for ourselves on this one. And at the end of the day, I think what we're going to come up with will definitely be a lot better than what's there now. So, yeah, again, we're just at a high level right now. We don't have the finer details of everything right now, but as we keep looking into the background of the condition of the pipes and the background of that drain that's going in behind your backyards, at the end of the day, our final product is to not impact or negatively impact your properties. And again, the developer wants to do a good job. He's a local guy, and yeah, I guess that's all I can say about that.
It's not the backyard drain that's the biggest problem. It slowly drains that pond that's in there now. It takes over 2 months to drain the thousands of gallons that are now contained in that pond every year. The main problem is the town, or the village storm sewer can't handle the water. I mean, if you put all those hard surfaces in there, plus take the drain, or the pond out, you're adding thousands and thousands of gallons of water into a system that just barely handles it now. It's not about Wellington Street, it's about McConnell and Hamilton Street where the water pools down in there. And it's also the fact that this year, Essex Kent had floods, Ottawa had floods, Montreal had floods, Toronto floods regularly because of all the hard surfaces that are there draining those storms that come in and dump that water in a hurry, and it has nowhere to go. Where it's gonna go when you take out those ponds and force it into our village storm sewers, or sanitary, storm sewers, is it's gonna go in my yard, it's gonna go in his yard, it's gonna go in his yard. It's not gonna sit in that postage stamp, little pond that you're suggesting that's gonna drain quickly into the storm sewers. It's just not gonna happen. It's gonna be in every neighbor's lawn, as they say. How high are you gonna raise those properties to get them out of the water that's there now in those low areas? That means all of our properties are going to be lower than those properties that you're planning on building. It's just, it's not gonna work as far as I can see.
Sir, okay, we're asking the councillors to bring their questions forward. I think Councillor Wright had one, and then Councillor Palmer. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think it addresses that question, and it's, again, through you to Hannah. It is a good point. We know we have numerous bypasses there now. So if you could just connect the dots to me, how can we get, in what circumstance could we get a plan of subdivision approved if we know that, it's hard for me to think of a scenario where that plan of subdivision doesn't increase the loading on the existing plant, which we know is routinely over capacity. So what, like I said, connect the dots, how could we get a plan of subdivision approved when this is a known issue?
Yeah, so through the to Councillor Wright. So that would be, again, staff would need to receive detailed engineering that demonstrates that. And unfortunately, I don't know exactly what the solution to that is. I'm not subject matter expertise in that area, but the township's engineer would need to be satisfied. In terms of what that looks on the property, again, there may not be a feasible solution, or it might be, they might need to have a very, very large storm water management block. I, again, don't know exactly what that would look like, but that would be the checks and balances in place in terms of if a plan of subdivision were received, it would be reviewed by the township. So the township has BM Ross as their consulting engineer. So we would rely on their expertise. And in terms of receiving an application, it would be either a matter of going back to the drawing board until staff are satisfied, or it would be a matter of it's a proposal that staff may not be able to recommend in favor of if there was a large technical concern with that. But again, unfortunately, I don't know exactly what the solution is to that issue.
But
this
to
time.
paraphrase, I think what you're saying is we wouldn't actually accept the plan of subdivision if it was going to make the loading at the wastewater treatment plant worse.
Yes. Yeah, so the purpose of the pre-zoning is to give some sense of what possible residential unit types may occur. Emphasis on the word may. There would still be technical requirements that need to be fulfilled. So the feasibility of the development still needs to be demonstrated through that plan of subdivision phase. It's just a much more appropriate planning application in terms of considering that, because you have a lot more detail in terms of the lot fabric, in terms of the servicing that's going to the site. So as Cobide mentioned, a functional servicing report, that's something that's accepted at the time of plan of subdivision. So it's just a much more cleaner process. And then in terms of allowing, the option to add conditions of things that would need to be addressed or implemented, if the stormwater management plan, when they apply for their plan of subdivision, this is their proposal, through the clearing of the conditions, they would need to demonstrate that that is actually being implemented. So, yeah, so in terms of the zoning, it's not necessarily giving the green light to the development. It's just one step in the process. But again, the detailed review is that plan of subdivision phase.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Palmer, please.
Thank you, Reeve. I guess to Hannah or Greg, there's a lot of emphasis on getting the water out, getting the sewage out. That 200 mil pipe at, where's that, McConnell, how deep is it? And that 20-inch storm water pipe, how deep is it? Like, it all kind of relates to that can't be changed, not easily. So that means that the development would have to be higher to flow. Is there room? Is there room in, I can't see it. Is there room in there for it to flow at the height of everything now, at the elevation now? With the regular amount of fill that would go in?
Through your Reeve Heifer to Councillor Palmer, that would be an engineering question that we would have to have both COBIDE and the proponent, as well as our staff engineer to answer. I'm not sure that I would have an answer for you at this point.
Don't know at this point.
No, like Mr. Colbide said, we're really at the very preliminary stages of discussion, and then after they've done their work, then it would be up to our staff engineers to either agree or disagree or come to some kind of compromise. But the ultimate plan would be that we would work together to make sure that it would work.
Okay, thank you. Like the common thread is definitely water. Do the roads, McConnell and Wellington and Hamilton, how do they flow naturally? Do they flow basically downtown, or do they flow back to where this development would be? Because that adds to the problem.
Yeah, so through the Reeve, unfortunately, I do not know the current conditions. That if COBIDE has a response to that, if that's okay with the Reeve, I would provide them the opportunity to comment.
For sure.
Well, I would say, obviously, the water flows into that pond. It drains my property, it drains our neighbor's property, it drains houses. The fruit about bag of factory, supposedly, been cut through the old railway track into that pond.
Yeah.
There's been drain cut into that. A lot of water drains into that. As I say, average 6 feet every year it rises. That's hundreds of thousands, or that's at least tens of thousands of cubic meters of water that drains off of our property. All our neighboring property drains into the.
Excuse me, we'll let Mr. Kobai, he was asked a question here.
Currently, those roads all flow towards Morris Street, so east to west, not towards the proponent's property. So, and the storm sewers all go that way too, down to Morris Street, and then eventually makes its way down to Blythe Creek.
Okay, any other questions from councillors? Go ahead, Councillor Palmer, please.
How are we fixed for capacity? Sewage capacity? How's Blythe fixed for it? Are they quite close to capacity now, or will they be able to handle it?
We'll ask Mr. Fortney to come. Thank you.
Through Reeve Heifer to Councillor Palmer. We do have capacity for this development, and we will certainly, we do need to do some more engineering and capacity studies just to make sure that the necessary capacity is there. However, based on our previous presentation by BM Ross, we do believe that there's opportunity there for them to work with us for this subdivision.
Thank you.
Pardon me again. How can you say that there's capacity there now when McConnell Street had water fountaining out of the storm sewers a foot high and flooding all those properties in there as of 5 years ago? As recently as 5 years ago.
Excuse me, sir. Excuse me, sir, we're gone past the public room. Thank you. Any other questions from councilors? Seeing none, move on. 6.1.5, procedure following the public meeting. This is a public meeting of the Council of the Township of North Huron. Thus, a decision of council may or may not be made this evening on the pre-zoning proposal. If the bylaw is passed by council, the clerk is required to send notice of the passing of the bylaw to the persons or public bodies that have made written requests to be notified of the decision. There's a 20-day objection period from the time the notice of passing of the bylaw has been mailed by the first-class post within submission. Letters of objections or support in respect to passing of the bylaw will be received by the clerk. If an objection is received, an appeal is lodged with the Ontario Land Tribunal, and at that point, the township no longer has any control over the time factor involved. If council does not pass the bylaw, the applicant may appeal to the Ontario Land Tribunal. If the bylaw is passed and no objections are received within the objection period, the clerk certifies that the bylaw is in force and of effect as of the date of its passing, and notice is forwarded to the Huron County Planning and Development Department. 6.1.6, summary of comments and recommendations of the Huron County Planning and Development Department. Planner Holman, could you please summarize the comments, please?
Yeah, thank you, Reeve. So, at this time, again, it'll depend on if council wishes to make a decision this evening. Again, that's not recommended by staff, but in terms of public comments, it is noted that in addition to the written comments, verbal comments were received on the issue of grading, drainage, servicing, stormwater management, and species at risk on the property. And that these were considered. And then in terms of agency comments, we, at this time, have not received any agency comments through the circulation.
Thank you, Planner Holman. 6.1.7, decision of council and effective comments. No decision being recommended and would like to come back for October 2nd. So there we go. That the Council of the Township of North Huron hereby receives a report of the planner regarding the pre-zoning proposal at 309 King Street, Blythe, dated September 13th, 2023, for information purposes. And further, that council hereby receives the comments provided at the public meeting. And further, that staff be directed to bring back a report with a recommendation on the pre-zoning proposal at 309 King Street, Blythe, at the next regular council meeting, October 2nd. We have a mover, Councillor Whitfield, seconder, Councillor Wright, all in favor? Oh, sorry, questions? Yeah, questions?
Yeah, Reeve, is there time? That's not far away.
Through you, your worship, to answer Councillor Palmer's question, yes, the planner and I discussed timelines, and we felt that October 2nd would be adequate to bring it back. Really, the intent tonight is for council to get a chance to hear the verbal comments in addition to the written comments, to take some time to digest those comments, and then a report will come back with the staff recommendation, and then a decision can be made by council.
Okay, so I have a mover and a seconder. All in favor? Carried. Thank you, Hannah. I guess you're going to be here for the next one. 6.2, North Huron Zoning Bylaw Review Public Meeting. Presentation by Huron County Planner. Planner Holman, would you please provide us with your info? Go ahead.
Suggesting a 2-minute break if people that
Oh,
are
okay.
concerned could leave the building before we get going.
Yeah, we'll just take a minute or two recess here, please, while as they go out.
Seems on the other side of town at this.
Might have to go for a walk back there someday. I wonder how much the sewer, seems like the sewer system is kind of, or the stormwater and sewer system to some degree.
Yeah, it dumps back to the creek,
Yeah.
but at 20 inch, when you start involving all this extra water.
Stormwater down
Yeah,
That's
but when you
gonna
start
leave to leave.
bringing all this,
I don't see how you can figure this all out in 2 weeks.
Okay, thank you, Ken. Well, that'll be duly noted.
But the, put in a new big stormwater line down there by the creek, maybe make it better for everybody, right?
yeah.
Might actually
riding home
alleviate
with
some of
somebody
the
else.
bypasses we have and stuff like that.
She's leaving you behind?
Neighborhood would
Yeah.
think it's flooded.
Maybe not, maybe not.
For the big development, there should be enough money in it to run a stormwater line.
Yeah?
Okay, at this time now, we can ask Hannah to present 6.2, opportunity to comment. Go ahead.
All right, yeah, thanks again, council. So the purpose of this next presentation and report is for council to receive the third draft of the zoning bylaw amendment for the general review, and it's also to host the statutory public meeting for this process. So as stated here, council will recall they did receive previous drafts of the text and mapping changes on March 20th and July 17th. And then this is specifically asking council to provide direction on site-specific zone mapping changes, any feedback on the general amendment, and then staff are recommending that the amendment be brought back for a recommendation on October 2nd. So council will note, as we went through this a few times previously, but since this is the public meeting, some of the points of my presentation might be a refresher for council, but possibly new information for members of the public. So in terms of the basis for review, council will recall the North Huron official plan was updated in 2022. There have also been recent changes to provincial legislation. At the time, there was provincial policy statement proposed updates that in 2020, the current proposed updates have since paused, but since it has been updated in 2020 since the last zoning review. And then there's been some housing friendly work done in the county. So all of these reasons combined, and as well, the last time the zoning bylaw was updated was 2013. All these reasons combined is the basis for the current review. In terms of the project timeline, again, in March, the First Amendment was received. In April, we did host 2 in-person open house sessions for members of the public. And prior to that open house, we did send mail notices to landowners with mapping changes. And then council received subsequent update reports, including receiving the second draft on July. And then at that meeting, it was directed that this meeting be scheduled for the statutory public meeting to receive public comments. And as we are reaching the end of the process, the recommendation will be that the amendment be brought at the next meeting for a decision. So as mentioned before, we did send notice to individual landowners in terms of our consultation. The open houses were well attended with about 50 people. Council will also recall that previously in 2022, we also did an update of the official plan amendment where we also did open house sessions. So a lot of folks also came out to those meetings as well. And then planning staff continued to correspond with landowners via email, phone, or in person. So in terms of the summary of the draft amendment, again, this may be a refresher to council, and it also includes some specific updates that are specific to the third draft amendment as part of consultation. In terms of a highlight of the mapping or zone amendments, so most of the changes are implementing the natural environment and agricultural changes in the rural areas. So this is following the review during the official plan. So that was previously discussed with council. That's one of the larger changes. implementing the flood hazard mapping in the urban areas, so Blythe, Wingham, and Hutton Heights. So since the last review, the floodplain mapping in Wingham and Hutton Heights has changed. Any cleanup of any existing special zones that are existing today that are inoperable or redundant with a notice to landowners. And then as we saw this evening, any further map changes pending consultation, so a pre-zoning. We have included an additional appendix that shows the wellhead protection areas for municipal wells, and the inclusion of the Conservation Authority notification area and adjacent lands as an overlay on maps for references. So this is to indicate if you are in Conservation Authority notification area as their separate process for information. So in terms of the natural environment changes, what we had found is a lot of the existing zoning was inaccurate or outdated in terms of the rural areas, in terms of which areas are zoned natural environment versus which areas are zoned agriculture. So our goal with that was to update the zoning to reflect the features on the ground. And again, this corresponds with the recent updates to the designations in the official plan review that occurred last year. And in particular, there is a change from the Natural Environment 1, which is the full protection, to Natural Environment 2, which is just your standard natural environment, with the intent that the natural environment full protection only be allocated to provincially significant wetlands, in which there is direction from the province that no development shall occur, and other significant features just be zoned to that NE2 regular natural environment, following provincial direction that if demonstrated otherwise, that development is appropriate, development may occur adjacent or within these features. We also did an update to the adjacent land setback in the general provisions. This follows the recent update to the official plan, and as mentioned before, including this as an overlay with the Conservation Authority notification layer around natural features as well as features of natural hazards. So in terms of objections, so any outstanding objections to the mapping are provided in detail in the following slides. So the purpose of this is we wanted to draw council specific attention to these properties that have outstanding objections. And if council wishes to provide any specific direction that differs from staff's recommendation or the proposed change on the property, so that consideration and feedback from council can be considered when the amendment comes back to council in terms of updating the mapping. And again, because this is a public meeting, to also provide the opportunity to members of the public or landowners to speak to these items individually if desired. So there are 11 properties in total, I believe, that will be considered amongst 3 different landowners. Some of the landowners have indicated that they would like to attend this evening. So there will be a section after my presentation that I can go back with council when the landowner wishes to speak, and we can go through the property specifics. But for now, I will just go over them briefly. And again, these were included in council's package, and we can certainly return to them. So this property is on Marnock Line. In terms of the changes of what is proposed here, so we have the existing area that's zoned Natural Environment 2. That's what's in the dark green there. And then what we have is what staff found is a lot of, because we have updated technology in terms of our mapping software as well as aerial imagery, a lot of the corrections that came up in terms of the zoning maps were what we would call edge corrections, just based on having more detailed information. So council will find there is occasionally changes that slightly move the natural environment areas along the tree line, either returning it to agriculture or keeping it natural environment. So that is a nature of the software that we use. In this case, that's what's happening here on this feature there, and then above it is just a proposed that this area that is identified as a woodlot, based on our information, that it be rezoned from agriculture to natural environment. The following is just to show for context historical aerial imagery of the property, which may speak to why this area was not initially included in the original zoning. Again, with having better technology, we are able to consider the features that are actually on the ground. So that's what's there. In terms of staff recommendation, it is recommended that council adopt the map changes as proposed in this map here. But of course, as I said before, we can go back and get specific council direction if they would like something different. And the landowner may speak. So similarly here on Curry Line, we're proposing that this woodlot feature be included in the natural environment, and as well as this area along the watercourse on the property also be included in natural environment, as there's a natural environment feature present. Again, the historical areas are included for context. So in this case, you can see that woodlot feature has been there historically, which is something else we found with the data, is that occasionally there were areas that were not included, even though they were there historically, which I think again speaks to why we thought this exercise was prudent. And then as well as the area along the watercourse, with the balance of the property remaining agriculture. So staff's recommendation is that the proposal as presented be approved. So Beecroft Line here, you can see the darkened green area is where it exists today as a natural environment area, and then some edge corrections to go to natural environment to better align with where the natural feature is located. This shows the historical aerial imagery. So the woodlot feature in the center we can see naturalizing. So staff's recommendation is that the proposals as presented be adopted. In terms of Beecroft Line, we can see the areas that are already included in the natural environment. Staff are proposing those remain as such, and then there's a proposed inclusion of this area that is abutting the watercourse. So the following does show historical aerials over time. And then just continuing there for council's reference. In terms of the recommendation, it is recommended that the changes be kept with the exception of this area here, which is identified as a meadow. Staff think that in this case, it's reasonable that it be kept as agricultural zoning. So in particular with these landowners, we did offer a site visit, but that didn't occur with these properties this time, but I have been on this site before as they have done a recent severance. So staff are of this opinion that would be reasonable. But again, the landowner does have objections to the other proposed natural areas being included. So this shows Marnock Line. So similarly, the green area is what is existing natural environment, and then these hatched areas is what is proposed to be included as natural environment. So you can see the aerial imagery, you can see that area in particular naturalizing over time. Staff's recommendation is that the natural areas be approved as proposed. So this is Belgrave Road. In this case, some edge corrections along there in terms of going to natural environment to agriculture, as well as the other way going to natural environment. To clarify, the landowner has said that their objections are the areas going to natural environment. And then we also have a water course feature here that has naturalized. This is just to show some aerials for context. And then we are proposing that these be adopted as proposed. As mentioned before, in the next section of the agenda, we will provide the opportunity for the landowner to speak if they are in attendance, and then we can certainly review these in greater detail. So this is a different landowner. So those previous properties were one landowner. So this is Curry Line. So in terms of the changes, the dark green area that's also hatched, that is a change that is proposing to go from the natural environment full protection to just natural environment because it's not specifically identified as a provincially significant wetland. So previously, the approach under the previous zoning bylaw is that typically all wetland or wet type features, they would be identified as full protection, but to align with provincial policy, we're proposing that go to natural environment. And then the rest of the property in the solid green proposing to stay as natural environment too. And then we have edge corrections. For context, some aerial imagery. and staff recommend that these changes be adopted. I will note that the landowner in this case, their objection is to any portion of the property being zoned natural environment. But at a minimum, we do think it is appropriate that the natural environment full protection go to natural environment too, as it is not a provincially significant wetland. London Road is keeping the dark green area as natural environment, and then as well, we have these areas where there's corrections to account for areas that have naturalized within this feature. So for council's context, aerials showing the woodlot naturalizing. So the staff recommendation is that the proposed change be included. And I will note that this is a property that the landowner was in agreement with our county forester going out to site. So he did go out to site, and I did speak with him after. So Dave Pullen, council will recall, he had a presentation a few months back. So his opinion is that there is clearly a natural feature present in that area. So staff's recommendation did take into account his site visit. So this area here, most of this area in the dark green is already zoned natural environment. We're proposing to keep that as is. And then with those slight edge corrections, as I said, as a result of better technology. There's some aerial imagery showing it's been there historically. Staff's recommendation is that that it be approved as proposed. So this is Belgrave Road. So again, the area in the green is what's currently natural environment, and then the area in the black hatching is what is proposed to be included, and then this would be a map of what the resulting change would look like. So again, we can see this area naturalizing over time to include those areas. It's staff recommendation that the proposed changes be approved and then retain the existing natural environment 2 zoned area, as there is an unevaluated wetland feature present. It's not at this time identified as a provincially significant wetland, but it's clear that there is a wetland feature there. And this was another property that our forester also did a site visit of the particularly the southern portion where the new area is proposed to be included. So again, if the landowner's in attendance, this landowner said if he was able to make it, he would. So I don't know if he's necessarily in attendance, but we can return to that. And then the last one was another landowner had objection to the inclusion of this area here in the natural environment area. So the rest of the changes is this dark green area that's hatched that is an area that was historically included in natural environment, and in staff's opinion, it's very clear that it's being cropped today. So that's an area that's proposed to be removed. This area here, that's natural environment, that's proposed to stay as is, with some changes between the natural environment full protection and regular natural environment to correspond with the provincially significant wetland. But in particular, their objection was in the inclusion of this woodlot feature in the natural environment area. And in particular, they have plans to potentially remove trees in this area. Just for context, and I did explain this to the landowner, the county forestry bylaw is still an applicable separate bylaw. So in terms of if they were to remove trees, that would still continue to be regulated under the forestry bylaw, but they still felt that they wouldn't like the zoning there, but that's something I just wanted to make clear to them that was still applicable. So you can see the historical aerials of that particular area. And again, staff's recommendation is that this be included because that natural feature is currently present. And so this landowner, when I did speak with them, they did not have plans to attend the meeting when I spoke with them. So as a result, they had just requested that one of their initial emails to me be included in the agenda package, so that is included. But again, we can provide the opportunity if anyone else wants to speak to this item. So just moving along, just to provide a summary of the draft amendment, and in particular the text updates. And in particular, what is specifically changed for the third draft, and then a refresher on any general amendments. So council will recall that for the agricultural zones, one of the primary changes is to allow additional residential units in agricultural areas. So this mirrors official plan policy. So on commercial scale farms, allowing an ARU either within or in a detached unit, so a total of 2 ARUs, with the criteria that the official plan said that they needed to be in proximity to the main dwelling or the building cluster. So that's where we have proposed 60 meters within the existing building cluster and to utilize the same laneway. The intent of this being to minimize any pressure for severances, hopefully to facilitate the use of shared services, so well and septic, and then also to potentially minimize any MDS-related impacts on any neighboring farm operations. For small agricultural holdings, so our AG4, small rural lot properties, a single additional residential unit is permitted either in the main dwelling or the detached structure, located within 60 meters of the main dwelling, just to provide for that clustering and utilizing the same laneway. We've also expanded permissions for on-farm accommodation for farm labor. Historically, this has just been permitted for mobile homes, so we would like to provide different building types, so specifically more permanent housing. And again, accommodations shall be clustered within the main dwelling, and if there's no main dwelling, within 60 meters of a main building. Some other changes, we propose the removal of livestock limitations on small agricultural holdings, given the inoperability of this provision. And we've included provisions for if you want to have livestock in an accessory building in terms of what the setbacks would be for that, and specifying that MDS would apply. We've updated the on-farm diversified uses policies and provisions to provide a wider range of farm businesses. So this is specifically following some recent direction from the province, and including a specific criteria on scale and size and servicing. In terms of housing and parking, so this is in particular to housing in service settlement areas and residential zones. So we've introduced new definitions for row houses in place of multiple attached, additional residential units, using the phrase multiple unit residential building in lieu of an apartment or a stacked townhouse, as sometimes they occasionally take the same form. And then residential with supports in lieu of specifying the differences between a hospice or an emergency shelter. Permitting supportive housing in all zones, the removal of minimum floor area requirements for dwelling units, with the thought being that the approach should follow the minimum requirements for this in the Ontario Building Code, provisions for accessory residential units, and then updating the parking requirements so that 1 parking space is required per dwelling unit, including ARUs. So something for council to be aware of, and in particular with the ARUs, is that because of the recent provincial legislative changes for ARUs, it's been directed that municipalities are not able to require more than 1 parking space per additional residential unit. So our recommendations have been partially informed by that requirement. We also did propose to include that 0.25 parking spaces for county housing operations be included. The reason for this being is just, in speaking with county housing, they don't see tenants typically with cars, and in our opinion, we would prefer to see units go in rather than have parking spaces go in lieu of a unit. And oftentimes, unfortunately, because of the income requirements, there's not much of a additional income to allow for a person to have a car if they are in county housing because of the criteria. So that's part of the rationale there, and it's just for certain county housing, we just haven't seen the demand for parking. Allowing off-site parking on neighboring properties for residential uses. So historically, this has only been allowed for non-residential uses. So we would like to provide the option that you can provide residential parking off-site, provided that it's secured with a site plan agreement registered on title. The following is a refresher on the housing framework. So this just outlines essentially what's currently permitted in the R1, R2, and R3 zones, and what's proposed to be allowed. So for the R1, it's also in addition allowing quadplexes, so 4 units, row houses to a maximum of 3 units, and then just proposing that the height be maintained at its current 11 meters. So council will note, because of provincial legislative changes, it is a requirement that any fully serviced, so that's having public water and public sewage lot, residential lot, is required as a right to permit 3 residential units. So that has informed our recommendation, so that is something for council to keep in mind. I mean, certainly there will be some existing lots in the township where 3 units and the required parking may not be able to be accommodated based on the size of the property, but that needs to be permitted as a right, subject to the requirements of the zoning bylaw in terms of setbacks and whatnot. The R2 residential medium density, so the row houses, the townhouses, proposing no unit limit, multiple unit dwellings, so that would be your apartment or stacked towns, allowing that to up to a maximum of 3 stories, and then allowing a retirement home use. The height is to be maintained except for having the height of 3 stories for the multiple unit. For the high density, allowing row houses again, and then allowing a multiple unit dwelling or an apartment to 6 stories. So that's what staff have proposed that was proposed in the first draft. So in terms of additional residential units, we're connected to full services. The following provisions will apply: a maximum of 2 additional residential units, either being located both units within the main building, or you can have 1 unit in an accessory separated building, and then 1 within the attached structure. So this follows what it currently is in the township official plan, and then also, as I mentioned before, it's in line with provincial legislation in terms of the requirement to allow 3 residential units per lot. In terms of partially or private serviced areas, so this would be areas like Belgrave, for example. In terms of the additional residential units, it will be based on the size of the property. And the reason for that is just to accommodate septic systems, and then as well to make sure that the lots are sufficiently large enough so that any effluent from those septic systems is able to be sufficiently diluted. So that often does require larger lots. So that is what is referenced with the nitrate study, is the nitrate study will look at what the lot size needs to be depending on the soils in the area. So if it's 2 acres in size or larger, 1 single ARU is permitted within the main building or an accessory building. If the property is smaller than 2 acres, it may be permitted. They would just need to do a nitrate study and then a rezoning to consider that. We have proposed to permit garden suites in the form of mobile homes. So there are not too many, but there are a couple garden suites, so that's mobile homes that are permitted for a maximum period of 20 years under the Planning Act. We have proposed that those be provided the option to transition to permanent additional residential units, subject to building code requirements. For the ARUs in the residential zones, that the following is what is proposed for the provisions. So we do have a greater rear and interior side yard setback than your standard garage or shed accessory building. And the reason for that being because these dwelling units are able to locate in the rear and interior side yard, we wanted to provide additional buffer to neighboring properties. The building height maximum is 6 meters. That's greater than the proposed 5 meters for your standard accessory buildings. With the idea being that occasionally we will see designs for additional residential units where they are where the bedrooms are located on the second story as a loft. And then the building size maximum. Again, because the ARUs are to be accessory and accessory buildings, we wanted to establish a parent-child relationship between that and the floor area of the main dwelling. So staff have proposed that these structures be no greater than 75% of the main floor area of the main dwelling, with the thought being that they are not able to exceed the maximum lot coverage as the property as a whole. In terms of the flood hazard, as mentioned before, there have been updates to the flood mapping recently, in particular in Wingham and Hutton Heights. So this has been updated to reflect that. Part of the purpose of this is a lot of members of the public are not aware that the Conservation Authority has their separate processes and their permitting. And oftentimes when people are inquiring about projects or looking at properties, they often just go to the zoning bylaw because most people know what zoning is. So we currently do have the flood hazard as an overlay on the key maps, which we want to maintain. But in particular in the urban areas, any floodway areas, we have proposed to be zoned FW, or if they are in a residential area, that they have a special floodway zone. So for example, residential low density floodway. And the text of this is included in the draft, but essentially just states that existing structures and uses are permitted and able to continue, but any alteration is prohibited unless a permit is issued by the MVCA. So this language mimics what MVCA direction would be in terms of their required permit in this area before you can get a building permit. So really in terms of staff's perspective, we wanted to make sure that that was well communicated to members of the public. And then in urban areas, any of the flood fringe areas to be applied as an overlay on the key maps. So what is specific to the third draft? So that's what's highlighted in purple in the text that provided to council, specifying the location of parking and driveways for residential buildings. So in particular, giving reference to the township and county entrance bylaws. In terms of things like the number of entrances or the width that are appropriate for entrances, we would prefer that this be deferred to the appropriate road authority and their entrance bylaws. Increasing the lot area maximum for commercial or industrial lots on private servicing. So we previously did this with residential zones on private servicing. The lot area minimum was increased to 2,000 square meters. And for this reason being, is with a lot of these smaller lots, it is just very difficult to fit a septic system and actually have room for a building. So that is why that's proposed to be updated. And then in particular to provide a special exemption to travel trailer use in the event of a catastrophe in residential zones. So catastrophe is defined as something like if there were a fire in someone's home. Currently, the travel trailer use in residential zones is limited to a maximum of, you can inhabit it for a maximum of 2 weeks per year, but we felt that it was appropriate in some extreme circumstances that this be provided as an option, and we do have a recent example where this was encountered. The removal of limiting distance between multiple residential buildings on high-density residential lots. So this spoke to if you had 2 apartment buildings on the same parcel, it spoke to that between the 2 of them, they needed to be set back a certain distance, even though they were on the same property. This has since been removed, as we would prefer to rely on direction of the Ontario Building Code, as they would consider what's actually an appropriate distance between apartment buildings based on what's actually proposed. We do have a proposal to include a site-specific zoning on an R3 zone county housing site. So council may be familiar with this site. It's located on Edwards Street, abutting Crookshank Park. And the proposed special zone is to recognize the existing reduced rear yard setback at 8 meters. So right now, the existing building, which is an apartment, does have a setback to the rear yard, which is abutting the park, of 8 meters. The current zoning bylaw requires 10 meters for your standard R3 zone. So we are proposing that this be recognized, possibly to facilitate a future possible extension of this. And then also that an on-site amenity area is not required due to proximity to the park. So it's also worth noting that depending on the number of units, that it would also be subject to site plan control. We do have a proposed inclusion of a site-specific special zone to recognize a historic trout farming operation in the rural area. So this is a property on Curry Line just outside of Blythe, and I did speak with the landowners. They do have a natural environment property, but they do have a residence on their property and a number of accessory buildings, and they do have a pond on their property, as well as they're abutting a water course. And so this was something that they had discussed, that they had historically used it for trout farming, and they had just wanted that use to be specifically recognized, although I would consider it legal non-complying, but that was their request. So I would consider that appropriate.
I didn't hear that word.
Oh, sorry. So that use for the trout farm, because it has existed there historically, it's likely that they would have legal non-complying status with, or sorry, I should say legal non-conforming status with respect to that use. But for their purposes, they want to see it specially recognized, and that was something that staff felt was appropriate. And then a continued review of any redundant or dated special zones in the property. So in terms of next steps, my recommendation in council's report is that they receive the third draft amendment for information purposes, receive any comments provided at this public meeting, and then staff be directed to bring back the proposed zoning bylaw amendment as presented at the next regular council meeting. And then as specifically as we went through the mapping changes, staff would be specifically seeking direction from council if they wish to see any changes other than staff's recommendation, just so that we can accommodate that in preparing the mapping for the next meeting. So I'm happy to answer any questions that council has.
Thank you, Anna. Is there any questions from council members? We'll go to 6.2.2 first, and this opportunity to comment by others in the attendance. Come ahead, Sir Luke. Would you be able to just do it into the mic there for us, Luke? It's just a bit easier hearing.
Green now.
It works.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Thank you.
It's not so much that light green sliver that I have an issue with. It's the one on the north end that goes from AG1 to the environment zoning. That is a planted bush. That was always farmland, as you can see on the historic pictures out of the 50s. I don't think that should be environment land. There we go, that picture, yes, thank you. Yeah, okay. So that's my issue with that one. The next one, please. This one. So on the bottom, that angle piece, from that house to the, I call it the southwest on the angle. A number of years ago, I had Brad Bunke instructed to come up with a plan, that's an engineer, to come up with a plan to close that ditch. At the time, there was still a house across the road. The cost, because the house up creek, I should say, to the east, that house has now burned, and because that house was there at the time, the cost of closing that in was atrocious. Now that house is gone, I can close it in, but now I'm stopped by this. So that's my issue there. Next one, please. That is just minor brush that you want to include in the natural zoning. That I don't see any need for that. Next one, please. To the north of that house is where my issue is. We're in process of replacing the municipal drain. And we're now talking about a drain of 2.5 feet because we cannot go through the north of that house. So I don't think that has always, well, it has always been pasture, and now it becomes protected land for natural zoning, and therefore we cannot make that drain longer. It would save a tremendous amount of money to make that drain longer, but the engineer wouldn't look at it because it's proposed to become natural zoning. Next one. Oh, yeah. So that is the Marnock Line property. We call it the river property. It is commonly known as the drug operation on the Marnock Line. Okay? We refuse to use that name. It is now Marnock River Estates. Okay? So law enforcement over the last 20 plus years was unable to remove a drug operation there. All those years it has been illegal to grow drugs, they were unable to remove it. So I went in with a checkbook, got rid of them, and I'm cleaning it up. Only to be hammered by a zoning change that now it's not farmland anymore. Now it's protected. I really get perturbed about this one. Behind my house is that triangle. Maybe you can point it out, Hannah. It's a little difficult to explain in this.
This area here.
Huh?
Is it, sorry, you can't see my mouse there.
Yeah. Okay, that little triangle in the center, south center of the property, that is simply farmland.
Is it this?
That one, yes. That is simply farmland. I don't know where this protection comes from. Okay, next one. Okay, that was it. So what I'm asking is to sit down again with Hannah and rework this, if you guys are instructing to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schadler. Is there anybody else that has any comments? I don't believe so. Okay. Now we'll go to 6.2.3. Opportunity for questions, comments from councillor members, please. Go ahead, Councillor Wright, please.
Yeah, just a question, when you're going through the presentation there, Hannah, I know we had talked about it before, but I can't remember really where we ended up with it, the number of parking spots for social housing. Do you know what it is now? Is it 1 parking spot per unit, or is it less than that?
Yeah, through the Reeve, so right now, there's no specific direction provided to specific county housing. So it would depend on what their building type was. You know, for example, they do have row houses in the township, which historically I believe were 1.5, and then apartment buildings, which were historically 1.5. So that's what's currently there. So there's been no specific direction for county housing. So that's why staff felt it was prudent.
Because my concern there through you, Reeve, is there's you know, I guess for the county, a fairly large social housing complex on Bristol Terrace. I don't know how many parking spots they have per unit. It's definitely more than 0.25, and that parking lot is full most of the time. So I'd like staff to review that section of it. You know, there's got to be at least 1 car in there per unit. So I see that there's a really large discrepancy between what's being proposed and what, you know, people out there that are living in these units actually are using or need. And, you know, what I view these units too is hopefully a temporary assistance, right? Somebody that's down on their luck a bit, you know, can get social housing, can get back on their feet and get out of social housing. You can't get back on your feet and get out of social housing if you can't have a car and can't have a parking spot, because we almost all have to drive to work, right? So I do have concern with that, just because it does seem to be significantly different than what I see, at least in that one unit that I'm familiar with.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Palmer, you had your hand, please?
Yes, with the mapping, you know, you talk about naturalizing so easily, you know, through the years, and through the years, the farmers at that time farmed different. And there's lots of times in 1955 where it was basically farmed. And then as it progressed, some just grazed it and let it slowly go. So it upsets me that it just, in 2023, all of a sudden, boink, it's considered, you know, not any one or any two, just so easily, because today's farmers are farming different again, and they want that agricultural. But Mr. Schindler feels strongly or passionate about his farms and some of the adjustments that were made. So what does it take for another meeting with him? What do we have to do?
Yeah, through the yeah, if staff would like to direct that I chat with him further, they can certainly do that. But specifically what we were hoping to get direction from council on is what their recommendation is going to be on these site-specific changes, as staff have reviewed it, and this is what our recommendation is. So that's more of where we're at, is just specifically seeking council direction, so that at the next meeting, when we hope to make a decision, that the direction from council in terms of the mapping can be incorporated. So that would be what we are seeking today, as again, we went through the public consultation process, and Mr. Schindler and our department have agreed to disagree in that regard, and it's clear that our recommendations are not aligned with his wishes. So that's where we are seeking council direction.
Go ahead, Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Reeve. Yeah, like you're mentioning that you're wanting our comments on these particular, the 11 maps. Like, when's that gonna happen? Like, we could go through the maps right now if you want.
Yeah.
There's only a few of us that are keenly interested in this, so it's not so good for the others. How do you want to do it?
Excuse me, Clerk Lamb, go ahead, please.
So through your worship, I guess, so the easiest way to go about this is, once council asks all their questions, then when we get to 6.2.6, so there's the staff recommended motion there, which would be to accept it as presented, which would be the recommendations of the planner. If council wants to see changes to those site-specific recommendations, we can go through those specific ones that you want to see changes to, and council can provide direction on that, and we would pass an amended motion, and that would provide the direction that the planner needs to bring forward something for October 2nd that incorporates those changes into the final version of the zoning bylaw amendment.
Okay, I had a question over here while you're thinking there, Councillor Palmer. Go ahead, Councillor
Yeah.
Whitfield.
Yeah, through you, Reeve. I just have a couple questions on the time period. If a farmer let the land sit for a year and didn't crop it or something, and a little bit of bush grows up, what kind of period of time before you are rezoning some of this land?
Right. Yeah, so through the reef, so we typically don't do these widespread zoning changes in that short of time frame. The last update was in 2013, and I will say at that time there wasn't the updated natural environment background document that provided that data, so the natural environment mapping's even older than that. So it would have to be something that's very clearly today is a significant natural feature in terms of it's not just in the process of just starting to naturalize. We would have to see mature growth, for example. That would kind of be it. Yeah, it's hard to say because we just historically haven't done these reviews at that frequent of time intervals.
So how big a tree would you have to see in order to do that? It's like a 20-year-old tree?
Right, so it's more on the area that gets identified based on like the natural environment technical document, because it's primarily done by aerial, so it would depend on the area. So I believe that may be a number that I'll need to confirm for the next meeting. I don't know at the top of my mind, but it's can be something like a half hectare, for example. That would be the area that would get picked up. Because the other thing we want to be mindful of is, you know, if folks have landscaping around their dwelling, they have a few trees there, that's not really something we want to be picking up there, so.
Go ahead, Councillor Wright.
Yeah, through you, is there a process where, and I know this is kind of a whole global thing, we're doing the whole municipality. Is there a process though that which a landowner, say they wanted to close in a drain or something like that, you know, 5 years from now, is there a process where they could come to the municipality and ask for a piece of land to be changed from NE2 to back to AG so that they would allow those uses to happen? Or once it goes NE2, does then the municipality have basically no opportunity to review those kinds of requests?
Yeah, so through the reeve, so if it's outside of the general review, then that would be something that would have to come forward with a site-specific zoning bylaw amendment application. That would be something that would be the responsibility of the applicant to propose. So for example, if someone wanted to have development in a woodlot feature, that's something that would need to be accompanied by, and the property was zoned natural environment, that's something where they would need to come forward with a proposal and submit their own zoning bylaw amendment for that.
Councillor Palmer.
Yeah, thank you, Reeve. To Clerk Lamb, I just want to get this right. So you're saying as we come to the end of this, we can ask for an amendment to where we can get comment specifically on some of these maps?
So through your worship, to answer Councillor Palmer's question, you as council can provide whatever direction to staff that you feel is appropriate. So there's a staff recommended motion included in your agenda package. That doesn't necessarily have to be the motion that gets put on the floor. You can put forward any motion that you see fit. If that's a motion that includes specific direction on the site-specific objections to the natural environment mapping changes, then that can certainly occur.
And then, just trying to understand totally, sorry. So then that would give councilors an opportunity to comment on these maps, some of them, specifically? Like tonight, or would this happen at another time?
Through you, your worship, to answer Councillor Palmer's questions, that would be direction we would be seeking tonight. What you will see on October 2nd is the final version of the update to the zoning bylaw that includes the direction you have provided on the amendments being proposed tonight.
Okay, were there any more comments from councillors? Okay, 6.2.4, this is a public meeting of the Council of Township of North Huron. Thus, a decision of council may or may not be made this evening on the North Huron zoning bylaw amendment. If the bylaw is passed by council, the clerk is required to send notice of the passing of the bylaw to persons or public bodies that have made written requests to be notified of the decision. There is a 20-day objection period from the time the notice of passing of the bylaw has been mailed by first-class post, wherein submissions, letters of objection or support in respect to the passing of the bylaw will be received by the clerk. If an objection is received, an appeal is lodged with the Ontario Land Tribunal, and at the point the township no longer has any control over the time factor involved, if the bylaw is passed and no objections are received within the objection period, the clerk certifies that the bylaw is in force and of effect as the date of its passing, and notice is forwarded to the Huron County Planning and Development Department. 6.25, summary of the comments, recommendations of the Huron County Planning and Development Department. Planner Holman, do you want to summarize, please?
Okay, yeah, thank you, Reeve. So as mentioned, it's not proposed that a recommendation, a decision be made tonight, notwithstanding those specific properties. But in terms of public comments that were received, we did receive the comments from the one landowner in objection to specific natural environment zoning on their property. And then in terms of agency comments, no formal agency comments were received.
Okay, thank you. 6.2.6, decision of council and effects of comments received on council's decision. I'm going to read this and then ask for a mover and or for questions, and then if somebody wants to put another one on the floor, please go ahead. That the council of the Township of North Huron hereby receives the third draft of the proposed zoning bylaw amendment with text and mapping changes for information purposes. And further, that council hereby receives the comments provided at the public meeting. And further, that staff be directed to bring back the proposed zoning bylaw amendment as presented with a report containing a recommendation at the next regular council meeting, October 2nd, 2023. Go ahead, Councillor Palmer.
Yes, thank you, Reeve. Yeah, I'd like to make an amendment for this, this motion, amend it to read, to allow councilors to make comment with these, with the maps that, the specific maps that are mentioned here, because there are some questions that we have. I have anyways.
So through your worship,
I know it's cluttered,
to make
sorry.
comment, you don't have to amend that motion. Now would be your opportunity to make those comments. So I guess, for the purposes of discussion, if there are specific sites that council wants to provide consideration to beyond what's been recommended by the planner, I would suggest you note those sites, and then Hannah can flip to those, and they can be included in the motion. So I would craft a motion if there are to exclude the site-specific natural environment mapping changes for specific properties. I would note, I would recommend that the member put those properties in the motion and then put that on the floor. So if you know there's specific ones, or if it's to exclude the site-specific natural environment mapping changes for all of those 11 properties, that's where you would need to provide direction.
Can I ask one further
Go ahead, Councillor
clarification
Wright.
question? So for this portion here, which was naturalized over time, if tree removal there, would that still be governed by the Forestry Act? I think you mentioned earlier, or just curious?
Yeah, through the reef. So the forestry conservation bylaw, and in particular, their criteria would be more on the diameter of the actual trees, which is an indication of their, like, how mature they are. But that's how they would assess it. It wouldn't necessarily be a matter of looking at the historicals of when it came to be. It would just be what are the current conditions in terms of the width, and then also the type of species would also be considered as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so you'd be looking for
Yeah, so
a motion, or
Yeah,
if there's
it's,
specific
quick order
properties
for
that you
this
want.
one, yeah.
yeah, through the Reeve, if it works for council, I'd be willing to go through the slides again and then just see if there's any specific comments on each property, if council feels that might make the most sense. I do know there's a number of properties, so,
Would that be all right, Reeve?
Sure. Yes,
Thank
go
you.
ahead,
Thank you.
okay.
Planner
Yep.
Holman.
So this is the first property, Marnick Line. Again, the objection, as mentioned by Luke, is this area here being included. In terms of staff recommendation, it is recommended that this area be included as there is a natural feature present there today. So that's what staff's recommendation would be. Again, seeking council comments if they would have provide different direction on this or would like us to bring forward a different map at the next meeting.
This is one, it would be, has this been visited, site visited?
No, it has
No,
not.
because it'd be nice to know that square. You can look in the history, and there were basically no trees there. How thick it is to warrant, you're calling it a natural.
Just my comment too, through you, Reeve. I think I share other people's opinion. I'm all for protecting woodlots, those features which have always been woodlots and nothing else but woodlots. It seems to me to be kind of a bit of a gotcha situation that if a farmer lets an area naturalize, that there's no recourse, that they can never take it back to a former agricultural state. So just, you know, as far as providing feedback from council to staff, I think there should be consideration for those places that were formerly agricultural land, that they should be allowed to return to that at some point, potentially.
There's a point too, Reeve.
Yep.
That was good, Mitch. Thank you for those comments. But another one is, I know when the ball got dropped here and we had to declare what's what on our farms, like up until that point, nobody knew that this crunch time would come. And just, you know, allowing some land to sort of naturalize or get scrubs on it, at some point they're going to come out. And but then all of a sudden the ball got dropped and you had to declare what things were, and then you look at maps and then it's out of the farmer's hands because he's lost it. And right, there should be recourse to claim back, especially if it's not a natural bush. And you can always determine the natural bushes. You know, just go back and it's easy to see. But if it's filled in slowly through time, that's not natural. It's not true naturalizing. It's just allowing it to go, and maybe it's being pastured. You don't know what's going on there. So it's still valuable as land to the farmer. And then again, a new farmer, all of a sudden, okay, I can deal with that. I'm going to get it out of there and farm it, because practices are different.
So could we move on to number 83925, please?
Sure. Yeah, and just before that, just through the Reeve, I just want to clarify this just so council understands. In terms of the county forestry bylaw prohibiting the clearing of areas and regulating the removal of trees, I just want council to understand that that is still applicable regardless of the zoning. So for example, this woodlot would be regulated under that bylaw. I just want that to be clear to council, that would still be something that is applicable. In terms of what it means for zoning, primarily how we use it is if there was a proposed new building, so an accessory building or a barn, it wouldn't be permitted as a right to locate in that natural environment area. It would be directed outside of that area. So I just want to make that clear because again, in the public also does have some misconceptions about when the county forestry bylaw does apply. So I just wanted to clarify that. In terms of if there's a desire for a site visit with the county biologist, that's just something that would require staff to have more time to do that. That is something we did offer through the consultation period, but that's just something for council to be mindful of, is that if that's desired, we can do that. If the landowner is firstly agreeable to that, that's something else to consider. And then secondly, we would just need more time to accommodate that.
Okay,
So
thank you.
with that being said, I guess I would just look to council if they want to provide different direction on this. I think staff's recommendation is clear on this, but again, we would follow your direction.
And again, that direction would need to be through motion of council.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion, Reeve.
Go ahead.
That 84-630 Monarch, what you have changed, or what has been changed from AG2 to NE2, or what 2?
Yeah.
To be reversed back to AG2, please. Or AG1. No, I guess the whole farm is AG2, okay.
Thank you.
Well, so my recommendation, unless council wants to deal with it by each specific property and pass 11 specific motions, my recommendation would be that you, if it's all 11, put a motion forward with 11. If it's 5 of them, put a motion forward with 5 of them. But you can deal with them each specifically if you want to do that too. Biggest thing is you need to provide that direction as a council as a whole.
Would you rather be one motion then, and we'll just include what the addresses?
Yep, yeah.
That might be easier for everybody? Okay.
Okay, so the next property is Curry Line, so including this feature here is natural environment as well as along the water course. Staff's recommendation is that this be included as presented.
Okay, comment from,
Yeah, may I ask a question? The water course that is there, what does it do for the other properties up and downstream if there's plans of closing it or anything like that?
The water course on the west, sorry, on the east side of that ends. But there was a house there at the time, and therefore I couldn't close my portion.
So it's not a creek or anything like that? Because it's so blue on the map.
My understanding was that it's a drain, but that might be something we would have to look into as staff. I'm not exactly familiar. I apologize.
okay, council, you got to speak up here. Do you want that looked at?
No, I think that block has been there for a long time. Just go with the recommendations.
Okay, so we'll move on to 85-190 then, please.
Reeve?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, through you, Reeve. So it's hard to tell, like, what you have in there is blocked. Is it AG1 or not? Like, it's a little ambiguous as we look at it.
Yes, through the Reeve, I wouldn't disagree. Unfortunately, some of the nature of our mapping software doesn't make it the most easiest to read, but essentially the areas that are the solid green right now, that's natural environment, proposed to stay as natural environment.
Okay.
That area here, similar case. The balance of the property that's just shown in the aerial, that's agriculture, proposed to stay as is. Where the large changes are is this piece here, proposed to go from agriculture to natural environment, and then, and then this piece here, I
Can't tell.
can't see that well. This piece here, as well as this piece here. Those are the areas proposed to be included as natural environment. This area up here, that's proposed to go to agriculture, so that's another edge correction. And then there's slight edge corrections around the property that are proposed to go to natural environment to agriculture, and then in the reverse, agriculture to natural environment.
Like it's scrub, which you're dealing with there, where your two circles are, that's scrub. So scrub doesn't qualify as natural environment. It shouldn't. It shouldn't. It can be cleaned up really easy. You gotta draw, I can Yeah, definitely, there's lots of NA2 here, you know, that's okay. But when it's kind of obvious that it's not as thick as the rest of the woods, the bush, it's telling you that it's a third the size or less, just junk. And it shouldn't be grabbed just automatically. Things like that should, you know, say you film satellite this 5 years from now, and it's much thicker, and the farmer hasn't done anything with it, okay.
Okay, so can we say that we're going to go with 190 then, please? That's going to be in your thing there,
Yes,
Councillor
please.
Palmer?
Yes, please.
Motion, okay. Number 270,
Yep, so this is, oh, sorry, this is Beecroft Line next. So what's changing from what was initially proposed by staff is that this area not be included, but otherwise we're proposing that the changes as proposed be included.
Councillor Palmer, go ahead, say. You're- No, we
It's-
gotta move this
Yeah,
on. so-
yeah, it's obvious that it's just scrub stuff there, Hannah. Like, it's not bush, you can just see it. It's not bush. That can be cleaned up really, really easily.
So we're putting in 272 then, please?
Please.
Okay.
Sorry, through the Reeve, just to clarify, so I'm understanding that, Councillor Palmer, that your motion would be not to include those two proposed areas that are proposed to be included.
When
Or just-
when I do make the motion, it will be, so what we're discussing, so I know it's harder for you, but it's what's in barred,
Okay,
anything that's barred. But we're talking about, not all of them, obviously, but it makes it really difficult. This is a hard process. But yes, that's what it would be in this case.
Okay, then we're moving on to 85043, please. Marnock Line.
Can I get more background on this, Reeve? Because this looks like it was always, like this was historical, long-term bush lot that was never zoned. But could I just get more kind of background on this parcel?
yeah, through the Reeve, so these are the aerials that do show the changes over time. Most of what is zoned, again, is that solid green. So from our perspective, most of the area that is captured in the 99s is included, notwithstanding this area. And then what the main difference is this slight area here now being included. That's the history of it.
So if you go back to 1966, then that beige area, that was all farmland?
They're planted trees.
Oh, they planted trees? Okay.
Okay, I'll ask for what you want on that on the motion then, please. Yes or no?
I'd say the lower, at least the lower barred one
So this area,
should be reconsidered.
okay.
What am I looking at here? Sorry, are those trailers? Like, what is that location now? It's a bit confusing.
Houses,
Yep.
they were full of trucks for 20 years.
Oh,
Yeah, it was marijuana for a long time.
I'm cleaning all of them up.
Yeah.
There were 28 houses, and there's now 5 or 6 left.
Yeah.
They will all be.
It was a great hiding spot.
So you want this on the motion then, Councillor Palmer?
Yes, please, the lower part,
Okay.
yeah.
So we're at 38934 now, Belgrave Road. And was there anything with this, Councillor Palmer?
Thank you, Reeve. The lower portion, which you have circled, that's being farmed now, I understand. May I ask the
Yes, go ahead.
landowner?
Yes, that's fine.
It's being farmed now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, yeah, so it's definitely that one.
That on the motion then?
Okay, so moving along to this next property on Curry Line, just again as a refresher, that dark green in the hatching, that is what is proposed. It's currently natural environment full protection, proposed to go to natural environment 2, regular, as a result of there not being a provincially significant wetland, and then the solid green being proposed to stay as the natural environment regular NE2. And then there are those slight, as I mentioned, as the nature of the software, those edge corrections to agriculture slightly on this side, and then including that on natural environment there.
Okay, no, leave it, please. Leave as is. Thank you. Next one, 85395 London Road.
Yeah, so the large change here is the inclusion of these areas here in the hatching, so here, here, as well as along that northern area there. Oh, sorry. And then just to provide some context to council, the naturalization of those areas over time. And then staff's recommendation would be that these be included, but again, seeking direction.
Go ahead.
I've been here, and it's scrub. Those two little parts are scrub. And the farmer today, you know, might not do anything with it, but the next owner will, guaranteed. So that's how I feel about something like that. It's scrub.
Okay,
And, yeah.
okay. Don, go ahead.
Yeah, through you, Reeve, just a point of clarification. Are we moving on from the properties that were owned by the property owners that is in attendance and going on to properties that are owned by people that are not in
Yes.
attendance and are not providing a verbal or in-presence request to have it reversed?
So through your,
Just going on the opinion of one counselor?
so through your,
Owner.
yeah, through your worship, to answer Deputy Falconer's question, right now, I guess I would say we're in the process of drafting the motion that Councillor Palmer will be putting on the floor. That motion is dealing with all of the 11 objections received. That includes the 6 properties of Mr. Schilder, as well as the other 5 where there's outstanding objections, but where they're not in attendance. So.
Yeah, through the Reeve, if I can just jump in. So now we have, so this previous property on Curry Line and then London Road, these are not owned by Luke. They are owned by Mac Anderson. So I have chatted with him on the phone, and then as well I met with him in person. Our county forester met with him. We certainly did encourage him to put his comments in writing because, again, I prefer that people advocate for themselves in their own writing, and that was something that they were not interested in doing. I also did speak with them last week about the public meeting. They did say they still had these objections. As a whole, if I were to summarize, their objections are to including the new natural environment areas, the areas that have naturalized over time. That's what specifically their objection is. And notwithstanding not having written comments, I still felt it was prudent for council to review.
Okay, you had your hand up, sir.
Yeah, just through it's just the context of having more representation in a public meeting by being here in person versus I'm going to say, but the opinion of a council member on the properties. I think the people that aren't here to speak for them, they've already spoken with a written recommendation what they want. I think that should fall under their recommendation and the recommendation of the county versus council's opinion of the properties, just for undue influence. I'm sure that they could have 20, 30 minutes to speak to each piece of the property here, but they're not here, so that we have to go on their written.
Right. So Council Palmer, you have a...
Yeah, I think not everybody can speak. We have to, I mean,
Yeah.
owners, and he asked me to, I saw all his properties, and some, you know, obviously, no.
Okay.
But some, there was
Okay.
good reasons,
Okay.
so.
So we'll move on, okay.
Just for clarification, what I mean by that is if we're going to officiate removing or relooking at one portion of land that was under, that had a letter of non-compliance to the new situation, we should group them all together and have all of the properties that have put in a complaint that they don't think they deserve to be changed back and forth, should all be done as one piece. I don't think we just should pick them out and say this one I think, and that one I think. If they had a comment from the owner, I think they should be all put together and dealt with in a motion at the same time.
Okay, so all of them.
Yeah, rather than pick them, I think if they all have reservations, they should all be put together for a revamp or a relook.
Can we go with that, Counselor Palmer?
Good, yep.
Okay. Okay, just waiting for the clerk to make up a motion here.
So your motion would be that the Council of the Township of North Huron hereby receives the third draft of the proposed zoning bylaw amendment with text and mapping changes for information purposes, and further that the Council of the Township, and further that Council hereby receives the comments provided at the public meeting, and further that staff be directed to bring back the proposed zoning bylaw amendment with a report containing a recommendation at the next regular council meeting, October 2nd, 2023, and further that the proposed zoning bylaw amendment exclude the proposed site-specific natural environment mapping changes for the 11 objected properties.
Okay, do I have a mover?
Sorry, Reeve, can we add that, my concern on the parking for the social housing in there as well? A review of that, because I just like more context or more basis of that the 0.25 is the right number.
I think that, yeah, that through the Reeve, that's something we can bring back.
Thanks.
So just have the clerk read that, the final part to us there.
So it would be, and further that the proposed zoning bylaw amendment address the parking requirements for county housing.
Okay, do I have a mover? Counselor Palmer, seconder. Deputy Reeve Faulkner. All in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time, Hannah. And thank you for the good report, because there's sure a pile of material in there.
Yes, I do apologize.
We sure
for-
had a reading for us, and it was good. Appreciate that very much. Thank you for the lights. Okay, so we're all done. 7.61. North Huron Museum Deaccessioning Project, report number 3, that the Council of Township North Huron hereby receives a report prepared by the Community Engagement Coordinator dated September 18th, 2023 regarding the North Huron Museum Deaccessioning Project. Report number 3 for information purposes, and further that the council authorized staff to continue with the deaccessioning process for the list of artifacts attached to staff report CS 2023-08 in accordance to North Huron Museum deaccessioning policy. A mover? Councillor Van Hillerson, Councillor Palmer, all in favor? Carried. 7.62, CAO 2023-18 Community Improvement Plan Application, that the Council of Township North Huron hereby receives a report of the Economic Development Officer, David, September 18th, 2023, regarding the Commercial Facade Improvement Grant application for 224 Josephine Street, Wingham. And further, that the council hereby approves the Commercial Facade Improvement Grant application for 224 Josephine Street, Wingham, to the amount of $3,559.50. And further, that the council, and further, that the Director of Legislative Service Clerks be directed to prepare and execute an agreement between the Township of North Huron and the applicant which outlines the terms, conditions of the grant program. Mover, Counselor Whitfield, Counselor Wright, all in favor? Carried. Thank you. Council reports. The Reeve Activity Report is able to go and represent us at the Belgrade Fall Fair. Again, it was encouraging to see what's just going on in our small municipality, but there's 700 kids plus there, and I'm sure happy that you allowed the North Huron Fire Department to go there and other things, just to, that many kids. The games, exhibits were busy, but it's just a great time. Again, yesterday able to represent you at the Terry Fox Run is really well attended. I think approximately 150, they think. It was really good. And again, last Friday at the Threshers opening, it represented you there at the opening, and again, able to go around, just see what's going on in the neighborhood in Blythe. It was just a busy place, and I'm sure the town felt it too, how good it is, and just all the people that volunteer their time to do that. It's just awesome. Okay, council members' reports. Verbal or written updates from members who sit on boards and committees. Are there any? Go ahead.
Yeah, just to reiterate, the Belgrave School Fair, the one game I was involved in, I had 700 kids go through it. It was tough. The lineup just never ended, but they had fun. And some of them are experienced and they know what to do, and others are so timid it hurts. But anyways, it was a joy to participate.
Great. Anybody else? Comments by members? Go ahead, Deputy Reeve Faulkner, please.
Thank you. The two comments, and they're kind of related. Well, first of all, I want to thank the Blythe public for coming forth and making their comments known here. I just want the conversation sometimes gets muddied when we're talking about rezoning, and then we're talking about drainage, and we're talking about infrastructure. I just want to say that the rezoning of that property has no reliable context to the infrastructure of the village or the ward of Blythe, any more than the rezoning that, or not the rezoning, but the infrastructure that would have to be changed if the A2A land in the Wingham ward was to go. We would have to upgrade the north trunk in order to facilitate the subdivision happening. And the river apartments down here, that we know that there's a restriction on the Victoria Street station there that has to be looked at, because there's 74 more apartments going in there, and there's a flow problem there. But I want to say that the observations that the town folk brought forth to us here, they're one of historic nature. The water problems are not the developer's fault that was coming here, because he was just going for rezoning. So, but I just want to make that clarification. But you know, some of the questions they had forward that weren't getting answered, like if we don't know the exact condition and the capacities of the streets in Blythe where you're going to be hooking into, I know that would come later on in a development, but as a municipality, you know, we can't just, I don't think we can rely on only if something happens or only if someone comes in that we need to look at our you know, what can we do, because we're looking at putting new homes in everywhere. So the conditions and the sizing and the capacities of our infrastructure, if we don't know it, that's on us. You know, we should already know that and be aware of that. But I think we should take the opportunity, now that we know that there is some interest in more real estate, more development, to look at funding, and now that there's infrastructure, hopefully grants available, now that we know that we've got some places, and if we knew the capacities and knew what we do, what we have and what we would need, now's the time to go ahead and maybe look at the funding for those procurements for the system to, you know, resolve some of the historic problems they're talking about. I know the drainage that they're talking about, you know, the storm sewer system are in the backyards. It's in my own backyard is where the water comes off. There's no street storm sewers connections on any of the streets there. They're all historic drains. So that's all I'm saying. It's just I want to thank them for their questions, but you know, these, like I said, the water problems there are historic, and I think we should be looking at our capacities and taking funding availabilities to improve that situation. Thank you.
Any other comments by members? Notice of motion. Seeing none. Bylaws. 10.1, bylaw number 63, 2023, routine disclosure and active dissemination of records policy. A mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Wright, Councillor Whitfield, all in favor? Carried. Bylaw 64, 2023, privacy and protection of personal information policy. A mover and a seconder. Councillor McBurney, Deputy Faulkner, all in favor? Carried. Bylaw number 65, 2023, council remuneration, expenses, bylaw. Mover? Councillor Wright, Councillor Whitfield, all in favor? Carried. Bylaw number 66, 2023, employees' business expense policy. Mover and a seconder? Councillor Whitfield, Councillor Van Hitterson, all in favor? Carried. Bylaw number 67, 2023, adoption of emergency management program and emergency response plan. Mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Van Hitterson. Deputy Reeve, all in favor? Carried. Announcements. The next regular council meeting will be held on Monday, October 2nd, 2023 at 6 p.m. in the North Huron Town Hall Theatre. The open house strategic plan input session and the town hall public meeting will be held on Monday, September 25th, 2023 at 4:30 at the Belgrave Community Center. The next Wingham BIA board meeting will be held on Thursday, September 21 at 6:30 in the Hot Stove Lounge at the West Cask Community Complex. The next Blythe BIA board meeting will be held on Thursday, September 28th, 2023 at 8 a.m. at the Blythe and District Community Center. And I just want to remind people in the public listening, the reminder of the Vance Fund. It closes October 9th, so any questions, just reach out and you'll be able to get some answers here. Are there any other announcements? Seeing none. Other business? Seeing none. Closed session and report note that the Council of the Township of North Huron hereby proceeds at 8:32 to an in-camera session closed to the public under Section 239 2B of the Municipal Act to discuss the following personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, personal matter, and further, that the county clerk, Susan Cronin and Jane Anderson, remain in attendance. May I have a mover? Councillor Wright, Councillor Van Hitterson, all in favor?